We're going to get started. My name is Kevin McGarry, and I'm the Associate Director for Public Engagement at the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. We're really excited to have Dr. Marie Christine Duggan with us this evening. She's an economic historian who's actually spent a lot of time here at the Presidio and at the Trust, and she's going to be sharing her research on José de la Guerra's trade with Europe and other parts of the world. And the effects it had on Santa Barbara. But I also want to just put a couple of things in the chat here before we get started. Nice to see everyone. Thanks for saying hello. The first thing is to become a member and to get emails about our upcoming events, first I'll put in the address for our upcoming events. It's sbthp.org calendar, and you can see things coming up, other talks like this and other online events since the pandemic started in March here in California, and we've been trying to do as much as we can online to keep you all engaged. So you can see what's coming up there. Also, please visit our site, sbthp.org, and if you're interested in becoming a member, an advocate of our organization, you can find information there to do that and to donate. So I have one reason why I'm really excited for this talk this evening is this book that the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation helped publish. It's hard to see, but it's called The Chumash in the Presidio of Santa Barbara, Evolution of a Relationship, 1782 to 1823. This was published by the Trust in 2004, and it's a study of the Chumash relationship with the soldados that were here at the Spanish Presidio in Santa Barbara. And we use this in our docent training and in our interpretation all the time. And I was just talking to Marie about how important it is as a resource for us as educators here at the Presidio. And so I'd like to also give a little background about Marie. Dr. Duggan has a PhD and a master's from the New School for Social Research in New York in political economy. She has a BA in international relations in German from Tufts University. And she's basically been teaching on and off at Keene State College in New Hampshire since about 2000, if I'm correct, in between her research projects. So she's done so much work to help advance the study of California history, especially as it relates to the political economy of California and the rest of the world. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Marie Christine Duggan tonight, and she's gonna say hello and then share her screen as she has a presentation slides for you. So welcome.
Thank you. Can you still hear me? Okay, great. So good evening. It's 9 o'clock there. 6 o'clock with you. And I want to, first of all, thank all of you for the support you've given me for many years, and especially Ann Peterson for inviting me to speak tonight. I think the Santa Barbara Trust and the Santa Barbara Mission Archive Library are both incredibly important resources for all of us. So let me go ahead here and share the presentation. So a couple of years ago, in 2012 actually, I decided to go to Mexico City and meet economic historians in Mexico who work on commerce for the same period in which California was settled by the Spanish, 1769 to 1810 was really the Spanish period, and after that it becomes more the Mexican period. And I learned things there about the context of who José de la Guerra was that none of us, I think, really knew. And so what I want to do today is present that. And I also want to mention the debt of gratitude I have to Louise Peebles, the late Louise Peebles, whose very helpful biography is something that I build on. And I'm sorry that she is not with us to hear it. let's see. It doesn't want to go to the next slide. Let's see if I can get it there. There we go. All right, so this is what California looked like from the perspective of merchants in Mexico City. And that is that, oh, I'm getting a chat. Does that mean, I hope everything's okay. If everything's not okay, you'll tell me. So over here we have Manila. And from the Manila Galleon sailed between 1566 and 1815, and it would start in Manila, go through the Marianas Islands, up north past Japan, and then head straight across the Pacific to Cape Mendocino, where it turned south. It sighted land at Monterey, and then it went ideally right through the Santa Barbara Channel. And then it would stop at Cabo San Lucas and head for Acapulco. And while we have this in front of us, I wanted to just let everybody see for a minute the important parts of the story. So in Asia, we have Manila and Canton, Manila being the Spanish colony. But increasingly business was done in Canton over the years after 1785. Up north, we have Sitka, where the Russians were hunting otters since 1741. Then down to Monterey, the capital of California. Acapulco was where the Manila Galleon landed, and it was really a port controlled by Mexico City mercantile community. San Blas was established 1767 by Bourbon reformers. It was a naval department, and then later it also became a commercial port. Panama was a place where British contraband from the Caribbean came across the isthmus into Hispanic Pacific. And then Lima. Lima was a place, there were ships going back and forth to the Orient from Lima. So my question is really, how did the changing economic incentives of the era affect the life of José de la Guerra y Noriega? And many of you will know that he was born in 1779 in Asturias in Spain, and he died in 1858 in Santa Barbara. So the year 1810 was a watershed in his life. And to me, it seems a little like the year 2020 in our lives, where this year, everything that we thought was quite solid has proved not quite as solid as we thought it was. And in 1810, that was what happened to everyone in the Spanish Empire, which began to disintegrate. The French took the Spanish king hostage in 1808, and by 1810, there was revolution welling up from Buenos Aires to Mexico. And as I navigated my own way through my time period, I found it very compelling to study how José de la Guerra had found a way forward for his family and for his community in 1810. And I'm going to stop this paper in 1821 or 1824. Mexico became independent in 1821 and sent a new governor to California in 1824. The story could certainly continue, and hopefully I will continue it later. So the context is bourbon reform versus Mexico City merchants. And really, this is what I learned about from Mexico City economic historians. I think that our historiography in English about California really only presented the bourbon reform perspective. And that is the official perspective of the government in Mexico City. So the wealthiest merchants in the Spanish Empire were in Mexico City. This was because Mexico City was midway between Asia and Spain. So when Spanish merchants came to Mexico, they offered cloth. Cloth was a big consumption item in the 18th century. And the merchants of Mexico City would say, well, you know, we can get better cloth from China and India at a lower price. So if you really want our business, you'll have to lower your price too. And that is what gave the merchants of Mexico City their extra profits, that bargaining position. And they had that bargaining position because of their trade with Asia. In 1762, the British occupied Havana and Manila. And this was a shock to the Spanish Empire. And we're going to concentrate here on Manila. The Bourbons decided to build up defense. in the Pacific, this meant building the Naval Department of San Blas in 1767, the Presidios in California, and then in Manila, rebuilding the walls around the city of Manila, which was really where the Spanish commerce took place. That's where merchants from Armenia, China, Japan, they all would come to Manila to trade with the Spanish. And the person that, so if you're going to build up defense, you have to raise money to do so. And the Spanish crown was thinking that the merchants of Mexico City are the ones that should really pay for all of this. And so José de Galvez came to Mexico in 1765, and a big subtext of that visit was that he was supposed to raise taxes by a tremendous amount on the merchant class of Mexico City, who were organized in a group called the Consulado. So the Consulado de Mexico was the financial nerve center of the Spanish Empire. And so as a result, mercantile activity moved into the shadows because of the heavy taxation. And that is really important to understand. Why haven't we seen more about these merchants? Well, because they moved their activities out of most documents because they didn't want the King of Spain. The King of Spain was antagonistic to them at that time. So we have heard about Vicente Fasabre's otter hide endeavors because Adele Ogden is a great, scholar who wrote about them. But Vicente Fasadre, I've come to believe, was only the tip of the iceberg. He was the person who had the Bourbon Crown's permission to organize otter trade in California. He only hunted otter here from 1786 to 1789, from what I see in mission account books. He didn't pay for 3 years. He didn't actually pay for the hides he got until 3 years later. And he didn't get a very good price for them. So there were other Hispanic actors doing otter trading, and they were financed by Mexico City. And I believe that that's where we turn next. So who was the uncle of José de la Guerra y Noriega? It was Pedro Gonzalez de Noriega. He was one of the wealthiest merchants in the Spanish Empire. And really how wealthy he was brought home to me by my visit to Mexico City. Because I was reading the work of Guillermina del Valle Pavón, and there he was, Pedro Gonzalez de Noriega, on many different pages, because he was, well, I'll start at the beginning, that he was considered a man well-versed in the business of Mexico City, a merchant with education, experience, credit, and ability. He was involved with collecting red cochineal dye in Oaxaca for export. He was involved in sugar plantations, and he was involved in raising livestock way to the north of Mexico City and bringing livestock on the hoof down to be slaughtered and served in the butcher shops of the 60,000 inhabitants of Mexico City. In politics, he was an ally of Gabriel Yermo, who was the leader in the Consulado. Because of the king's efforts to confiscate wealth from Mexico, the Gabriel Yermo led a coup against the viceroy in 1808, and Pedro Gonzalez de Noriega was involved with that as well. Yet even so, in 1809, when the Spanish crown was in trouble, José de la Guerra y Noriega donated quite a lot to help the crown preserve its independence, and he did so again in 1813. He donated 50,000 pesos. At the time, 1 peso is the same as $1 because the US dollar was backed by a silver peso. And just to give you some sense, his 50,000 peso donation was about half the entire payroll for all 4 presidios in California for a year. So he was a wealthy and powerful man. And in 1796, he received a permit to export otter hides from Mexico to Asia. And when I saw that, things started clicking into place because I realized that his sister's son, who was José Antonio de la Guerra y Noriega, must have come to California in connection to that permit. Now, the story I'm telling is one where I see evidence, and I'm going to tell you the evidence that I see. But I don't have as much evidence as I would like because this trade was a little bit under the radar. Yet I think the story is too important not to tell. It's so important for us to understand the ties of California to Mexico City mercantile community. So José de la Guerra and his uncle were part of the Asturian faction of the Consulado de Mexico. The business community was split into Asturian faction and Basque faction. So he was born in 1779. He arrived in 1792 at age 13 to apprentice with his uncle. And this was standard practice at that time, that you would receive your mercantile training at that age. And in 1798, at 19 years old, he entered into the office of the California Supply Line, working for Habilitado General Manuel Cárcava. And this was a military office, so he entered the military to do this. But I'm certain that his uncle his uncle wanted him in that. And what it looks like is that the Noriega commercial house was controlling, or at least heavily influencing, the California Supply Line at that time. I would love to know more about Manuel Cárcava. I do know that there was a struggle in 1790 to control the California Supply Line, and it moved from Aristegui to Cárcava. And Aristegui was more an ally of Bourbon reformers, and Cárcava appears to have been more an ally of the Mexico City merchants. And now, initially, José de la Guerra worked for Cárcava in Mexico City. Okay. Now, why was there this change in the supply line? Well, I think the biggest change in incentives occurred in 1790, when the price that the Chinese were willing to pay for otter hides rose to $120 per hide. This is according to Adele Ogden. That would be what caused Mexico City merchants, such as De la Guerra's uncle, to move their gaze to California. And Fages, who was governor in 1786, said that it was possible to harvest 20,000 hides a year in California. Some people have expressed dismay, since we only have 3,000 otters in California at the moment, as I understand it. But there were 1 million otters at the time between Baja California and Alaska. And if they harvested 20,000 hides per year, the potential revenue would have been $2.4 million in the dollars of 1790. And it's about 28 modern dollars for one 1790 dollars. So that means that there was a potential harvest of about $67 million per year off the waters of California. And I don't want to suggest that any one person ever got that. Many people were interested. And I also don't want to suggest that the price always stayed up at 120. I think a price of $40 per hide was more normal. But as an economist, I look at incentives, and this high price is what was pulling everybody's attention to California. Many years ago, I noticed that in the book published by the Trust by Giorgio Perisinotto, that in 1791, Manuel Cárcava sent beads to Presidio Santa Barbara. He sent 50 bunches of fat beads, green and dark blue, and 50 bunches of garnet red, and 1 cape of scarlet with its corresponding braid and red hat. And it says in the document that these are intended for the hunt of otter. And then there's a follow-up document where Goicoechea says that he's sending otter hides to Cárcava, and Cárcava should please use these hides to get even more beads and other things to send back to Santa Barbara. And the way that hides were actually collected in Santa Barbara was, of course, by the Chumash. So with their Tomo canoes. So the Chumash, so the beads were valued by the Chumash as long as they were unconverted, because the Chumash had a shell bead system of money. They had minted money on the islands out of shells prior to the arrival of the Spanish, and the Spanish beads sort of slipped right into that system. And I do believe the beads did have value to the Chumash. So on the one hand, the beads were not that expensive for the Spanish soldiers to purchase, but they did carry value to the Chumash. So in a way, so later we're going to find that José de la Guerra is habilitado. So what a habilitado was, so by 1801, de la Guerra would actually leave Mexico City and arrive in California in 1802. And before him, there were other habilitados, but the habilitado had a store where the soldiers could come, and they were paid about 250 pesos a year, and they could convert their pay into goods. So they had a credit of 250 pesos a year and they could convert that into goods. So they could buy tobacco, they could buy stamps, they could buy shoes, they could buy soap, and they could buy the beads. And then the soldiers were the ones that would go out and interact with the Chumash and persuade them to hunt otter hides in return for the beads. And then the soldiers would bring the hides to the habilitado, where they would transfer them into, although the hides were worth 120 pesos in Canton, that's not what a soldier in Santa Barbara got. He would get about 7 pesos. But if you think about their salary being 240, 250 pesos per year, if you had 10 hides, that would be worth 70 pesos, and that would be a really significant bump up in your family's income. So if Cárcava could mail on the military transports beads to Santa Barbara, and if Goicoechea and others in Santa Barbara could mail hides back to Mexico City, then why did José de la Guerra y Noriega need to come physically to California, which he did by 1802? And here we come to incentive 2. War had broken out between Spain and Britain between 1796 and 1803. And the war was so intense that Spanish ships could not get through the Atlantic to supply Spanish America. And therefore, the Bourbon Crown legalized trade with neutrals. And neutrals turned out to be Americans in practice. And I think the King of Spain really meant that New England men would come down from Boston to supply, maybe Havana. But there were New England merchants in Canton, and they sailed across from Canton to California to pick up otter hides. And it was legal for them to do so. It was fully legal, I believe, for 2 years during this time period. But it was kind of considered fairly normal for the entire period of the war. So this is a picture of the route that the Americans took coming from Canton. Later, they'll be involved in bringing opium from Turkey. I don't know if they were bringing too much opium in at that time, but later they would. And then they would pick up silks and cottons and lacquerware and pottery and bring it. Well, they would go via Hawaii, and then they would head up to Sitka to trade with the Russians. So Asian cloth and spices and things in return for otter hides. And then they would come down to California and pick up and do the same, sell Asian wares in return for otter hides. And then they went back to Hawaii and off to Canton, where they could sell the otter hides to the Chinese. Just a little aside is that the Russians didn't actually have the right to sell otter hides in Canton. They had the rights to sell them through the other direction, through Siberia. So that's one reason why the Russians appreciated that assistance. Anyway, so the Spanish started to do that too. So it's my belief that Manuel Cárcava sent José Antonio de la Guerra to Monterrey in 1801 as part of an effort to prevent the California Presidio commanders from selling hides to the Americans. The permission was no longer there even by 1802, and the point was to now shut this down. The Presidio commander should stop selling to Americans, and they should sell to the Mexico City merchants. There was a man from the Naval Department of San Blas who said he used to pick up 1,200 hides at the Presidios, but by 1803, he said the Americans las pagan bien, they pay well, and he was only able to get 240. And I think the Americans were paying about 10 pesos per hide, according to Adele Ogden. And as a result, they needed to do something. So when José de la Guerra got to California, he found Manuel Rodriguez, who was kin to Cárcava. We don't know exactly, was he his son, was he a nephew? I don't know. But Manuel Cárcava was paying part of Manuel Rodriguez's salary. So Manuel Rodriguez was habilitado at San Diego starting in 1798 and later acting commander. And Jose Antonio de la Guerra Noriega was habilitado in Monterrey starting in 1802 and later acting commander. So men who represented Mexico City interests controlled the ports of San Diego and Monterrey. But now we have left the ports of Santa Barbara and San Francisco. So Santa Barbara, the commander of the Santa Barbara Presidio was at that time Jose Raimundo Carrillo. And the maximum, as I understand it, that he could earn in California was 400 pesos per year. And let's just, which I've calculated was about $100,000. But here comes Jose de la Guerra, who waltzes in and collects 400 pesos per year, plus he also has the right to earn 1,000 extra through commissions from the Presidio store that he's running. And the same for Rodriguez. They were able to earn 400 as habilitados, but also an extra 1,000 from running these stores. And of course, de la Guerra was much younger than Jose Raimundo Carrillo. He was only 22. And Jose Raimundo Carrillo was a second-generation military man who had battled Indians in 1775, and basically he had done all the things one does to earn respect in the community. So one can imagine that for a man like that, the opportunity to trade with the Americans during the war had really permitted him to vastly expand his income. And this is really who de la Guerra had to persuade to stop exporting hides to the Americans. And then there's also, up in San Francisco, Jose Dario Arguello, who was in the same position of being someone that was highly respected, but had maxed out on the salary he could earn legitimately. And in a way, this is a flaw in the Bourbon structure in California, that they actually reduced salaries to military men in California in 1781, just as otter hides were increasing in price. And so for Jose Dario Arguello, de la Guerra seems to have offered to train his sons Santiago and Gervasio in accounting, which opened up more lucrative careers for them in the military. And in fact, later, Gervasio Arguello would become habilitado general out of Guadalajara in 1815, and probably with de la Guerra's support. And of course, the more important thing de la Guerra did was he married Maria Antonia Carrillo, the daughter of Jose Raimundo Carrillo. And this marriage was a very important marriage because it created an alliance between the self-made men that were highly respected in California and controlled the ports of Santa Barbara. And I think the relationship with Carrillo also opened the way to the relationship with Arguello, and the merchants of Mexico City. Now, of course, people will say, well, but weren't they in love? Well, they were the right age. Maria Antonia was, I think, 16, and Jose de la Guerra was 22. So it was a natural age for them to marry. And I think they both were the type that would have put the family's interest first. That was the world they were raised in. So I do ask myself, why Santa Barbara? You know, if maybe de la Guerra could have gone up to San Francisco, married one of Arguello's daughters, and perhaps there just wasn't one available at that moment. But I think that Santa Barbara was a particularly important place. And at first I thought maybe because the Chumash had the Tomal canoe, and that could indeed be part of it. But also, and because there were some unconverted Chumash who could hunt otters, could be. But also, I found this past summer online the guide written by a pilot on the Manila Galleon, Gonzalez Cabrera Bueno, in 1734. And in this, he says that the place where the galleon always interacted with people was at the islands off of Santa Barbara. He said the Chumash of Santa Rosa Island are muy amigos de los españoles, very friendly, and they have little ships like the ones they have in the Ladrones but without the sail. The Ladrones were the Marianas Islands near Manila. And this is actually a picture of the galleon interacting with the native people of the Ladrones. And so this, I think, is what it looked like in the Santa Barbara Channel when the Manila Galleon sailed through, except without the sails on the tomos. This is from the Boxer Codex. So this is a picture from the Ladrones, but I now think this is what it looked like. And, you know, Gonzalez Cabrera Bueno wrote this down in 1734, that the best thing a navigator could do was to interact with the Chumash on the islands. He says you can repair your ship, you can exchange Asian wares with the Chumash in return for fresh water, and you can do this without leaving the ship. You know, if members of the crew left the ship, the chances of a violent encounter were much higher. And everybody who sailed a Manila Galleon knew the story of the ship that had foundered on rocks and been, you know, turned into smithereens in the 16th century. So the galleon was heavily laden with very valuable things. It took about 3 months to get from Manila to Santa Barbara and another month to get from Santa Barbara to Acapulco. They usually came in December, and then they would arrive in Acapulco in late January or February. Anyway, I think that explains to me now why Santa Barbara was such a key place. It was the place where the trade route from Asia actually physically interacted with people. And I think that probably for a very long time. This was just a picture I saw in a modern paper that showed me the channel shipping lanes, which I just found helpful. Now, okay, so, you know, my specialty is to look at the Spanish documents and the Spanish literature, and I rely on Adele Ogden to tell us what happened. And what happened was in 1803, the Americans were able to buy lots of otter hides. In 1804, they came back and the door was closed. They were unable to buy otter hides from Presidio commanders at any Presidio in California. It was a sudden stop that shocked them. So I believe that I believe that this story of José de la Guerra and his uncle is the backstory to how that happened. So Manuel Rodriguez went back to Mexico City. He was promoted to be habilitado general himself in 1807. He died in 1810, and José de la Guerra got word that it was time for him to go back to Mexico City and become habilitado general. And you know, this makes sense that his assignment to California was temporary and he was supposed to come back and be with his very wealthy, powerful, and influential family. And Luis Pobol says that there was talk of bringing lots of Carrillos back with him to Mexico City so they could rise in the ranks of the world. But in the end, they only brought Maria Antonia's 14-year-old brother, and the idea was that he would become an apprentice for the Noriega family, just as De la Guerra had been. And they brought their 4-year-old daughter, and they sailed for San Blas. And yet, everything in their world completely changed when they got off the ship in San Blas, because insurgents had taken over. The road to Mexico City was closed, and it would remain closed for many years. And De la Guerra and the young brother were arrested by insurgents. This is Jose Maria Mercado. He was the insurgent, and they were condemned to death. They did not die because it was not long. It was only a few weeks really before the royalist General Cruz, Jose de la Cruz, retook San Blas, and Jose de la Guerra got out of prison. But Luis Pujols tells us that their young daughter did not survive. We don't really know what happened. Jose de la Guerra fought with General Cruz for a while, and then the following year they returned to Santa Barbara, but without the daughter. And it was completely unexpected that they would return to Santa Barbara, and it symbolizes the complete break that De la Guerra had now from his family. His link to the wealthy family in Mexico City, he still had the name, and he used the name to open doors, but he didn't have, he just acts on his own. He becomes a regional merchant. And the regional merchants are connected to Guadalajara, not to Mexico City. And Guadalajara becomes the central commercial, the place from which voyages to California are financed. Well, they're financed from Guadalajara and Lima. So at this point, this is a map that my colleague in Mexico made, Denis Trejo Barajas, and it shows you that there are routes coming up from Lima, Guayaquil, and Panama to San Blas, and from San Blas to California. There's trading routes coming down from Sitka, the Russian trading route. You have Americans coming from Canton via Hawaii, and you have Spanish merchants, which she shows them coming through Hawaii, and I haven't seen confirmation of that the Spanish were going through Hawaii too, but she clearly thinks so. And then you can see that from Jamaica to Panama, some British goods could be transported. So this was the world that California was relying on. And De la Guerra no longer had, well, initially, he still writes checks on the account of the Presidio in Mexico City. So the first problem is that the ships of the Naval Department don't come up, but he still has the ability to write drafts on the Mexico City bank account. But by 1815, it is unclear if there's money there. So who came up? And I feel like we don't know enough about these Hispanic merchants, so I just want to mention them. The first one must have been Benito Fernandez de la Vega on the Tagle, because Arguello married a daughter with him. And we hear nothing more about that. It's just a footnote. And I suppose that's because the daughter went with Benito Fernandez de la Vega back to wherever he was from. Was he from San Blas, Guayaquil, Lima? I don't really know. The name Tagle, that was the name of his ship. It's also the name of a major mercantile family in Manila, Mexico City, and Lima. 1811, Jose Arce came on the Mexicano. He did collect tallow from missions in the San Francisco Bay, and they were happy to sell it to him. They had 2 years worth, and he paid a good price. In 1812, Nicolas Noé did a fairly daring voyage all the way from Panama, which meant he had to sail fairly far out into the ocean and then up and around, and this is against the current. So I think he was a daring fellow. In 1813, Jose Bandini came on La Reina de Los Angeles, and I have met a Peruvian scholar who is working on the people behind financing that. It made a second voyage later all the way from Cadiz to California. That's the only private ship I know of that came all the way from Cadiz, Spain to California. And it was financed by a man named Olazagare in Guadalajara and Rodolfo, who was a Genoese in Lima. This is a picture of Juan Bandini, who is Jose Bandini's son, and Juan Bandini is with his daughter, so Jose Bandini's granddaughter. Of course, I would love a picture of Jose Bandini, but that just did not emerge. And I like having some pictures because I feel like we don't know as much about the Hispanic merchants as we could. So there was also the route from Asia. The Navy supply ship Activo under Jose Maria Narvaez sailed to Manila in 1813, and on the return to San Blas, stopped at Santa Barbara to give De la Guerra a lacquered Chinese trunk containing cloth from the Orient. And this is a picture of a Dalmatia from Mission Santa Barbara, where Monica Orozco and Tina Foss told me that it was probably made of cloth from Asia. You know, the naval ships did carry merchandise, and it's important to know that the naval ships from San Blas sailed to Manila fairly regularly, starting actually in 1767, even before they supplied California. One of the reasons for founding San Blas was, in fact, to have a way for the Bourbon officials to get mail to Manila without relying on the merchants of the galleon, because they didn't have a good relationship. And in 1815, the galleon ends, but by then there are private ships, and the Varela family and the Perez de Tagle family were two mercantile families in Manila who had been doing business in the Hispanic trading circles since the 1720s and 1730s. So Captain Varela comes on the San Ruperto in 1818 and 1821 and supplies California. And the Perez de Tagle family finances the Santa Rita in 1819. And this is a picture of some cloth from Mission Santa Clara at the CESAP Museum, where they have, this is also a vestment made from Asian cloth. Now, okay, so I asked myself, well, why did José de la Guerra, if he had these relationships with Hispanic merchants from San Blas, from Lima, from Guayaquil, and from Manila, why bother with Americans? And the reason was because the Hispanic merchants were bringing shiploads of like 5,000 pesos worth. From Manila, they could bring 15,000 pesos worth, but for California. In 1816, B.C. Wilcox was the American consul in Canton, and he was heavily involved in the opium trade. After the War of 1812, the Americans brought a lot of opium from Turkey to China, and Henry Geisler actually had brought the opium from Turkey to China on the Lydia. And then when the opium was sold in Canton, they filled the Lydia with cloth and spices and such. And then he sailed with Wilcox's brother, Santiago Smith Wilcox, to California. And they had $90,000 worth of goods to sell. So you can see that that really was the quantity that California was needing. And in 1815, General Cruz started to charge a lot of customs in San Blas. And so it may have been that the prices were also better. And plus, in 1816, nobody from Hispanic America came up to California. So there was a really interesting scene where De la Guerra, Santiago Arguello, and a Carrillo have kind of a fake arrest of Geisler's ship. And once they have him arrested, they negotiate with him to buy his cargo. And the problem is, so by then, De la Guerra is commander of Santa Barbara. He became commander in 1815, and Pablo Vicente de Sola was governor of California. Now, Sola was a member of the Basque faction in Mexico City. He was not the top of the line merchant. He was connected, though, to the Fagoaga families who were in the Consulado de Mexico. So he was from the Basque faction, and De la Guerra is from the Asturian faction. So they were not, they weren't blood brothers in a way, but they could work together. And the trick was to convince Sola to let them, to the Arguello Carrillo De la Guerra group, wants to trade with Geisler, and Sola doesn't want them to. I think he was probably appointed to the position in order to prevent trade with Americans out of Canton. But, by this time, California is running out of options. I'm not sure that Sola ever really got funds from Mexico City, and he didn't have any ship. So eventually he comes around and he says, okay, if Geisler and Wilcox will they let him use their ship to bring wood from one California port to another? He has some beams that he wants to get from one part of California to another. And it will either take 100 oxen or a ship. And Geisler doesn't actually have room on the Lydia to do that, but he promises to come back. And Sola lets this go through, and sure enough, Santiago Smith Wilcox does come back. And the first thing he does on the Traveler is to ship the beams for Sola, and Sola becomes very heavily reliant on him. However, there's still Hispanic actors that don't want these Americans getting this business. And when Santiago Smith Wilcox heads to Loreto, probably to sell additional Chinese wares in the Gulf of California, and along the way, Concepcion de Arguello is on board, and he proposes to her, but she turns him down, which kind of gives you a sense that maybe the Americans were not the most important at that time. But anyway, when he gets to Loreto, another Hispanic merchant seizes his ship, and that's the end of that relationship. But it was a good story and kind of interesting. It was interesting for me to see that the Americans were, they had to really ingratiate themselves. In 1816, 16, the Americans were not all powerful. So who were all powerful? Well, De la Guerra sent his son to, so by 1820, the Varela clan, which had lived in Manila for 100 years, had relocated to San Blas, probably to be merchants importing Asian wares. And De la Guerra sends his son down there, Juan, to be educated with the Varelas. And so that's trying to create a relationship there and establish a member of the family in the San Blas mercantile network. Louise Pubol said later, this son was sent to Britain to study with Brotherston. Brotherston was a very big merchant in Liverpool who financed John Begg, who was in Lima. And John Begg sent Hartnell up to California. Edward Hartnell, who was so John Begg, Brotherston, Hartnell, they're all British. And it was really the British mercantile networks that almost every Hispanic trader that I've seen decided to collaborate with. And so De la Guerra married his daughter to Hartnell in 1825. And Hartnell also had a cousin, I think his name is Crichton Wiley. The cousin was in Hawaii. And so De la Guerra was getting into that contract. And really, I was surprised. But if you stopped the clock in the early 1820s, it was really the English that dominated commerce. I mean, De la Guerra always maintained his ties to the merchants, the Hispanic merchants. And in fact, in 1830, I find a Juan de la Guerra y Noriega in San Blas doing business there. And I can't quite figure out what his relationship is with our De la Guerra. But I'm very impressed with De la Guerra. And I also think it's important to point out that at this time when Hartnell married De la Guerra's daughter, you know, that was a huge accomplishment for Hartnell. So it wasn't only De la Guerra that wanted a way to create trust and familiarity with the English. The English also wanted to create family ties to Hispanic merchants such as De la Guerra. All right, well, I will stop there. And hopefully I still left time for discussion. Kevin, are you going to come back?
I'm coming back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Here I am. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Duggan. We do have some questions. And if you have questions now, since we're towards the end, we have a few questions, but if you want to add some, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'm going to start with one from Elliot, one of our longtime board members who wants to ask, to what extent were the Chumash able to exercise agency in their economic dealings with foreigners during your period that you've researched?
Well, I have a theory that the military wanted the Chumash to stay out of the missions so that the military men could hire the Chumash to hunt otter, because the whole import beads and exchange beads with the Chumash worked better when the Chumash were unconverted, and of course they had more, they could decide to hunt otter more easily. So I think that the, you know, in the three institutions, the mission, because when Indians were baptized, traditionally you had to relocate to a mission, but in Santa Barbara, it was decided that the Indians did not need to relocate to missions. And I feel that this had something to do with the otter boom, but this is just a Marie Duggan pet idea. And I haven't found proof for that. And it could really be that new ideas were coming in about how to interact with Indians. But I think because of this split between what the military wanted and what the missions wanted, the Chumash actually had quite a bit of agency in Santa Barbara. And they were well known for being the most sophisticated political community in California. So I think they had quite a bit of agency. And the fact also, let's say that Chumash wanted to get the benefits of Spanish society. Traditionally, missions were supposed to say, well, the only way you can get the benefits of Spanish society, such as learning to ride horses, obtaining cloth, is if you convert to Catholicism. But if there was this other way of hunting otter and interacting with the soldiers to get things, that also put less pressure on the Chumash to convert. So I think there was a certain amount of autonomy. I wrote a little book about this once, but I know more now than I did then, but still, I think that book talks about it. I mean, a bookcito, a tiny book that the Presidio sells.
There's a follow-up question to that, I think, what you're just speaking to. Was the sense that the natives were poaching otters?
Poaching? Well, poaching would mean like somebody doesn't want you to do it, right? So I don't think anybody, we in the 21st century would like to protect otters, but I don't think anybody at the time was particularly interested in protecting otters, not that I know of. I think Indians and soldiers all thought, and probably missionaries all thought, that hunting otter was a good idea because it brought in extra revenue.
Let's see here. Sorry, there's lots of questions coming in. This is good. Sally, longtime employee of the trust, asked if there's a book that you recommend that focuses on the otter trade.
There isn't anything written about the Hispanic otter trade. In fact, in English, it says that the Hispanics were not involved in the otter trade. And I have seen plenty of evidence in various different years that they were, except for Vicente Fasadre. So Adele Ogden wrote a good book in 1941 about Vicente Fasadre's. But you get the impression that he was the only Hispanic involved in the otter trade, and he wasn't a very good merchant. And she really presents it that the New England merchants are far superior in doing business. But Vicente Fasadre really worked for the Bourbon government. He was a government employee, and he got promoted to very good positions afterwards. So he wasn't really so much looking for money as he was looking for, I'm sure he wanted money, right? But he was really looking to rise through the ranks, and he did. So there is something written by a man named Bernabeu in Spanish, which talks about several different other otter things. And if you want to read my paper, there is a paper with all the footnotes. I wrote it for a Spanish audience, and sometimes I think the introduction seems lacking for an American, but that has all the footnotes. And if you guys want to email me, I'd be happy to send it to you. So I better write more about the otters and the Spanish merchants.
Thank you. And we have another question. Was there a contest over the control of money supply? I don't know what that means, like in terms of.
Yeah, well, there wasn't really much money, right? There was just credit at the Presidio store, and there was a contest for control over the Presidio supply line. And I do believe that I think that the merchants of Mexico City viewed the habilitado position as a way to get one of their family members into one of the 4 great ports on the Pacific Trading Network: San Francisco, Monterey, San Diego, and Santa Barbara. And I think that if we looked deeper into the people who had those, we would find that De la Guerra was not the only habilitado connected to Mexico City merchants, and not even just De la Guerra and Rodriguez. I'm suspecting that men like Diego Gonzalez, who was an earlier one, and Ramon Lasso de la Vega had some ties, but I can't find, I'm still hunting,
All right, and thank you. And we have another question from Dr. John Johnson from the Museum of Natural History. Hi, John. Have you studied the relationships between De la Guerra, Sola, and Cruz?
I got tantalizingly close. So hi, John. Learned so much from John. De la Guerra, I read the correspondence between De la Guerra and Sola. And in it, Sola says that he received $1,000 advance from the treasurer of the port of San Blas, $1,000 advance on his salary. And that's very interesting. And we know that Cruz would not give the California military budget. The California military only got 20% of their budget by the end, by 1819. They only got 20% of what they needed. And that was really Cruz's decision. But I don't know more. I did find recently that there's letters between Sola and the Viceroy at the Bancroft Library, and I haven't seen those. And maybe when I look at that, I'll see a little bit more. But I think, you know, I unfortunately do not have a fleet of graduate students. If I had 20 graduate students, I would send them to scour the archives in Guadalajara, because also the Arguello family winds up there. And I wonder, I wonder if there's papers from that family, because they were obviously very involved too. And also I could just say that my colleague in Mexico, Denise Trejo Barajas, she's written some good stories about the mercantile changes happening in San Blas at that time, which were very eye-opening to me. And I published one article with her in English where I translated some of her stuff with the Maritime Museum of San Diego. You know, I have a little academia.edu website. If any of you want to go there, you could find the article in English that talks a little bit more about San Blas.
I might be able to post that in the chat in a sec here. So we have, let's see, we have a follow-up question. I just want to go back to this because it is interesting. So this question is about beads functioning as money, you know, which most of us who have studied the period in the trade between the native and settlers have and then, you know, going forward, have heard about this. So what about the beads functioning as money? So they didn't have the same monetary, you know, function as they have now, but this, that's just a follow-up question about the second to last question, I think.
Right, and you know, I think that's really fascinating too. And Alfred Kroeber actually publishes in his Handbook of the California Indians the value of shell beads in different parts of California. And that does tell us that even pretty late in the game, right, because Kroeber was writing in 1910 and talking to people who maybe were older but had not lived more than 100 years, that still the shell beads did have some money, it did have some value, but I think they had much more value when more people were unconverted. And, you know, I'm not an anthropologist, and the actual value, you know, what, you know, to what extent beads served as a medium of purchasing things or a kind of symbol of status or a or jewelry, I don't know that, right? That, so we'd have to rely on anthropologists like John Johnson and the many others who work on the Chumash, or maybe asking the Chumash themselves to find out what the beads meant.
This is an interesting question, and I just don't know the answer, or even I'm not sure if you have the answer, but were the U.S. opium traders also trading in otter hides, or were they totally unrelated?
No, they were definitely trading in otter hides. It turns out that recent work, there's this book called The Golden Ghetto by Jacques Down, and he really goes into how Bryant and Sturgis and the Perkins family were heavily involved in the opium trade. And I actually saw an account book in Boston from the Perkins, and you know, I saw maybe like $10,000 worth of otter hides, and then I turned the page and it was $1 million worth of opium. So it's pretty, you know, this was the source of the wealth that founded the Perkins School for the Blind. So it was kind of shocking to me that the opium was such a big part of it. But that was the point. You would bring opium from Turkey to Canton, sell the opium at a profit in Canton. Then you would purchase Asian products and you would hopefully sell them in Latin America or to the Russians at a profit. And then you would obtain otter hides from the Russians and the Spanish and go back to Canton and sell them to the Chinese at a profit. That was the triangular trade that the Americans were trying to make a lot of money doing, and they did. So, but the Americans, but just to finish that up, the Americans were not powerful in the period I was talking about because they hadn't amassed fortunes. De la Guerra marries one of his daughters to the Americans, to Alfred Robinson, in 1836. And I think that's when the American opium traders were really powerful, was the 1830s. That's the Bryant and Sturgis period.
It's incredible to think, you know, we know this modern term globalization, but just how much was happening, you know, before that term was even coined. So we have another question. Let's see. Asking about Ortega's link to De la Guerra. Let's see. I don't know if it relates exactly to. How was, if you know, this is a general question, how Ortega was linked to De la Guerra?
How Ortega was linked to De la Guerra?
Maybe in the context of this.
You know, Ortega and Argüello and Goicoechea, well, I don't know if Goicoechea was right at the beginning, but Ortega and Argüello were both involved with the founding of Presidio Santa Barbara. And later, Ortega gets Rancho Refugio. And I just smell that the otter trade is involved with that somehow. And later, De la Guerra marries one of his children into the Ortegas, and that's how he, like something, I think it was, if I'm I don't know, I think it's like 1824 when Rancho Refugio is then, his family, the De la Guerra family has part ownership in Rancho Refugio through marrying into the Ortega family. But Rancho Refugio was always associated with Presidio Command. It was always the port of Presidio Command. And so I tend to think of Rancho Refugio as the place where De la Guerra did most of his trade, which implies a pretty close relationship with the Ortegas. But not that it's all written down in plain English.
All right, I think I got through most of them, maybe all of them. There are a few more, but I don't know if they're more specific, maybe that you can respond to later. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I'd love to thank Dr. Marie Duggan for being with us and sharing her research about this interesting topic. And I'm going to put in the chat one more time a few things that you guys might be interested in. We have upcoming events like this one, and you just go to sbthb.org/calendar, and you get to see we have 2 more lectures that we have scheduled into the new year, and we're going to keep doing these events to keep everyone engaged and to make sure that everyone's up to speed on all the research and preservation activity that's happening near us. And yeah, I think if you have any questions, I don't know, Marie, if you want to put your email or any kind of anything in the chat so that people can reach out to you if they have further questions. But I think you're going to get a survey as this session ends, and you'll also get another chance tomorrow, and you get a follow-up email to do a little follow-up survey. So we'd love to hear your feedback about this this evening.
Yeah, if I could just, sometimes people in Santa Barbara know more details than I do, though I try very hard. And, if you do know, for example, about Asian products that belong to the De la Guerra family, or Asian products from this time period that are in Santa Barbara, I would very much like to know about that. I feel at some point we ought to do an exhibit about the Asian trade with California through Manila and Canton, and I'm trying to sort of get a list of actual exhibitable items. And anyway, I always know there's always somebody in the audience, because you guys are such an educated group and you care so much. There's always people who know things that I don't know, and I'm happy to get corrected if there's, as I get sometimes little things wrong, and I would appreciate if you have something to tell me.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Duggan, and I hope to see you soon. And that's a great idea, and we'll follow up with that. Especially, I think our members would be interested in seeing an exhibit like that. And we hope to open soon, everyone. If you go to sbthb.org, you can see about our reopening and our COVID, updates. So stay tuned, and please look for our emails and look for our future lectures and our future online events until then. All right, everyone, take care.